Click the subscribe button below to receive new videos as we release them. Hit the thumbs up button so others can find our content. For more information, visit thejerusalemassembly.org.
Embracing the Truth Series, Part 2. The Spiritual War. By Ruben Garcia. Greetings. Peace, love, and prosperity to all my beloved family and dearest friends. It has been a while since I have had the honor to bring you the latest spiritual notes shared by the spiritual guides during these perplexing times. Thus, I am back with a substantial and troublesome, informative narrative affecting present humanity. First, and bluntly, our lives and our present times are journeying through significant spiritual discomforting times, causing emotional ambiguity on a daily basis. Unfortunately, most individuals are completely unaware of it, therefore creating unconscious emotional distress, resulting in physical symptoms, such as nausea, headaches, muscle spasm, etc., to mention some. Second, we are unknowingly participants of an evolutionary cosmic journey in which two determinants, protagonists, have embarked in offering a choice to humanity, so to speak. Whether we chose to accept or not, we are in a spiritual war. And there is no availability to become a spiritual conscious objector. You cannot and will not be allowed to refuse performing the duties aligned with either dogma, tradition, or in this case, spiritual consciousness made available. In any case, vouching for alternative spiritual service, such as spiritual mediators, has consequences, in which I will share at end of this article. I will be direct and confronting in the fact in today's society some individuals have been spiritual presumptuous personalities who have been excessively overconfident unconsciously, acting in various daily routines affecting others, such as helping yourselves to emotional drama, in which benefits you without permission. Of course, this trait principle has been embedded in our lives for over 2,000 years. It has influenced humanity so much that today's applicability has benefited the resourced ones, leaving behind a large portion of the so-called emotional helpless. The question that humanity will confront in the year 2026 and into 2033 is how this vicious principle of spiritual arrogance came about and became an integral part of our spirituality. The simple answer: we were taught it. So who, what, and where was this and other similar principles orchestrated to have humanity disciples of such spiritual travesty? The answer lies before you every day, and most of you are completely unconscious of its natural purpose and distorted representation of who we are, where we come from, and which divine deity we owe divine representation. Subsequently, we have been existing and manifesting our heritage in a misrepresentation in which we may have been representing a false doctrine. Would a distorted agenda, or, as I was shown, fears and spiritual apprehension coexisted along with blind servitude, and these principles coexisted for thousands of years, denoting biases, prejudice and improper reasoning, until now. Now the day of reckoning is at hand, in which the false doctrine travesty that endured for over 18 centuries through secular deception and spiritual betrayals has come to a reckoning. The time has come for it to be exposed. Imagine for a moment two opponents with similar effective persuasive dialogues to influence their ideal perspectives in spiritual situations confronting an unaware society. Imagine, for example, both having similar strategic verbalization to everyday worldwide spiritual situations. Using structured religious language can easily influence, persuade, and usage of inventive rhetorical motivation. In short, the longer the stance, in the case of religion, credibility and logical arguments has emotional appeals. Therefore, the newcomer challenger must not rely in much more dialogues and assumptions. It must accentuate its message with credibility, specificity, and a forum in which understanding spirituality is independent from any religious constrained activity that undermines the spirit and authority of divine morals and beliefs of the believer. In short, the challenging dogma must be effective in exposing flaws, rules, and ideals, salvation, assisting any human being to be cognizant of a flawed dogma that conveys dependent absurd expectations and fails to provide spiritual independence. And that is core, the essence of today's religious spiritual warfare in humanity's existence, and it must be addressed. Voluntarily, however, be aware that mental persuasiveness is part of a distorted reality quite common in traditional religion. Maintain a passive observation in an alignment with the infinite Source, God, and the Father, to achieve a sober awakening. It will mean that humanity conscience would take a direct hit. Simply, humanity must awaken to the not only the truth but also the light often emphasized in sacred scriptures as a principal essence within humanity. Fortunately, this spiritual travesty does not maintain tragic ending or tragedies in human nature, but its effects is simply spiritual confusion. And it is here where all that was dogmatic taught, absurd imitation, must be revealed, and it this deceptive representation of today's spiritual war has come to be, for some during this divine war will view everything as a Greek tragedy where humanity experiences a terrible event causing great emotional distress, rendering spiritual sufferings. In the opposite spiritual spectrum, portion of humanity's consciousness would view the conflict between the two divine natures in this spiritual warring scenario as a simple spiritual conflict in which a spiritual mockery influenced in the past by an authoritarian enterprise having for purpose to control not only the mind of individuals of the time, 3rd century, 325 AD, but also designate who benefits from a new enacted principle, salvation or not. Sadly, the relentless new movement was such crushing blow to an already discipleship that the true divine principle, divine spirituality residing within each one of us was completely forgotten until now. Consider this provoking note referring to the current spiritual injustice we have entertained for over 8 centuries. Imagine for a moment that there is currently going a spiritual conflict affecting humanity's current moral cognitive principles and not so new other one more fluid. The dilemma has for purpose for humanity to make a choice between a principle and dogma existing for over 1,000 years and now becoming known as the substitute for the one enacted in 325 AD Roman Christianity. Suddenly, humanity since December 2012 is catapulted into the 21st century alongside with unprecedented spiritual awareness syndrome from an ancient doctrine that emphasized human nature as divine and immortal, and the principle of wisdom inherent of its existence. Consequently, it seeks or has for intention to subvert an established dogma system or established secular institution with a subversive spirituality, simply, the fact being to overthrow, replace, and an established system considered by humanity to be a constituted the authority. It may seem a little bewildering by many in its messages and purpose in the coming 3 years. Some may find it to be somewhat difficult to understand or assist. Best one yet, is the loss about what to do, or who would be the one to enlighten the troubled masses. What many in so-called authorities will confuse more many already in an oscillating spirituality. Regurgitating spiritual dilemma, or in what I vision to be an unclear situation for many experiencing mental dogma uncertainties because themselves will find inner spiritual confusion. In short, you will expect and have to deal with the cognitive principle of uncertainty where what was once unthinkable to consider is now real. What was once carved in stone, it is now being shown to be not so sternal. These principles of divinity referendum may initially create hesitation to accept any precepts of a new divine existence. Initially, many individuals will maintain the inability to act on it, and that will be understandable, for the time been. Confused now? I would expect that would be that for a large number of humanities. Nature. It would be as being in an emotional maze without the resource to find an easy access. Nevertheless, humanity cannot avert the one principle of a divine duality of the dozen or so other divine principles humanity must confront during current spiritual war. Thank you for using Panopreter Basic. Therefore, this social behavior is one of the major underlying conditional responses the duality dogma principle. Confronting every human will confront during the spiritual war we currently entertain. It will not be as bad as it will be made by certain facets of the religious arena throughout the world. However, just as it was through the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century after Yeshua's divine ministry, those interested but also feeling deep inside of yourselves that something is not spiritually right, will entertain the possibility that there is tangible truth that once existed, a dogma that not only saw but also dedicated life to bring the greatness of greater God, benevolent, loving and full of mercy. The God Yeshua called Father. And not the one that was jealous, requiring authoritarian obedience, and death. Yes, my beloved readers, there was once shortly after Yeshua's ministering journey ended, humanity saw and witnessed the existence of two deities. One of a great source of love, Father, and a jealous and one having or showing a strong and sometimes unreasoning desire to castigate or revenge. You can find the depictions of such divine entity of his spiritual behavior in the scriptures, check it out for yourself. So, we come to the end of our dilemma and the year 2026. I referred at the beginning of the article that I would point out how one can avoid the emotional impact relating to the arising awareness during the divine quandary impacting human consciousness and both emotional and spiritual conditions. Look at it this way, the way I was shown. We were and are given the divine notion existing in a spiritual polluted atmosphere that has been in existence for over 17 centuries, and its dominion may be in its final act. I have been since 1981 aware of a spiritual coherence which I will fully address in a later article. That is the reasons I established the www.thejerusalemassembly.org to bring the divine validations in which humanity is not longer a spiritual spectator but a divine reality performer. Therefore, humanity is at the threshold of a radical divine transformation from an old nature to a completely new supernatural one in which you have mastery of your divine nature and divine insight that within you resides the trait essence of a divine creator, the infinite source who is not found in the cloud but in you is the source of all that is here shared. Thus, if this transformation period, year 2026, is now within the scope of your grasp, manifest uncertainties and possibly fears, you have available, shall I call it emergency exit door? Death. Yes, you can manifest to depart peacefully in your sleep and will not be penalized for it. You will be aware of passing away of people you would not expected to hear of their unscheduled departing. The reason is not fear but spiritual ambivalence which will overcome their soul's agenda. They will be back through another reincarnation phase anyway. The culprit of this departure is not the soul or the spirit of the Father but rather, the ego which mastered the virtue of survival for millennia and will overcome all other divine faculties. However, I must remind you that you chose to be here at this time to assist those in humanity's divine quandary. In fact, I must also point out that many of you, the ones that maintain the divine current light, are souls that had an existence during Yeshua, Jesus, times and understood the essence of his true divine message, decided to be here at this time to hold the light for those souls that were not able to be by Yeshua's side as you did. Hopefully, you now can understand the significant importance of keeping his divine dogma and messages alive and the underlying spiritual war at hand. Shared it with everyone at this time whenever you can. We are under a transformative spirituality. Knowingly, you know that it won't be an easy task, but remember what he said over and over again: the kingdom of God, source, is within you. It is what the spiritual war is all about. More on this in later articles, but next a view into spiritual dissonance. And it is as it has been and will be, the now existence be a now disciple. Much peace, love, and joyful and enlightenment. Upgrade to Panopreader, the standard edition, more voices and features available, and know this audio clip.